Have you ever looked at a map of modern global conflict and wondered why wars today seem virtually impossible to resolve? We see city blocks reduced to rubble, millions of people displaced, and localized disputes suddenly exploding into multi-nation proxy web crises. It feels chaotic, almost irrational. But what if there is a cold, mathematical logic driving all of it? What if the devastation we observe on the news isn't an accident of war, but the predictable outcome of strategic incentives?
That is precisely the paradox of modern conflict. When we examine kinetic operations through the lens of game theory, we realize that actors on the battlefield are rarely acting out of pure madness. They are responding to payoff structures where destruction itself becomes strategic currency. Take urban warfare, for instance. Fighting inside densely populated cities isn't just a tactical choice forced by geography, it's an asymmetric game. A weaker force intentionally embeds within civilian infrastructure because it reshapes the risk-reward matrix for the stronger military power.
Right, because for the stronger actor, striking that infrastructure creates massive humanitarian fallout, displacement, loss of basic utilities, global condemnation. But if they don't strike, they leave high-value targets intact. It puts them in a classic strategic dilemma.
Exactly. And from a game theoretic perspective, critical infrastructure becomes the ultimate leverage point. When power grids, water facilities, or communication hubs are targeted, the immediate goal isn't just tactical damage, it's shifting the burden of survival onto the adversary's civilian population. The resulting humanitarian crisis isn't merely a byproduct of the kinetic strike, it is converted into political pressure. It forces the opposing leadership to divert resources from combat to basic crisis management, altering their negotiation position.
It's a harrowing thought, but it explains why civilian displacement has become so systemic. People fleeing combat zones aren't just fleeing violence. Their movement actively alters the demographic and economic dynamics of entire regions. And that brings us to how these localized human crises don't stay local for very long. They spill across borders, creating entry points for external powers to step in.
That is where proxy networks and multi-state entanglement transform isolated sparks into regional infernos. Consider the Middle East and Iran's network of non-state proxies, running alongside heavy US military presence and regional sovereign states. In classic game theory, this is a dynamic, multiplayer, repeated game with asymmetric information. Each proxy acts as a buffer for its sponsor state. The sponsor can project power, launch kinetic attacks, and signal resolve, all while maintaining just enough plausible deniability to avoid a direct, catastrophic war with another major power.
So, it's essentially an escalation game played in the gray zone. Sponsor states push the envelope just far enough to gain strategic depth, but stop short of crossing the threshold that would trigger full-scale state-on-state confrontation.
Spot on. But the danger lies in the incentive structure. For the proxy on the ground, their dominant strategy is often perpetual friction because their political relevance and funding depend on ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, major powers like the United States find themselves trapped in a commitment problem. If they withdraw, they create a power vacuum that adversaries immediately fill. If they stay, they risk getting drawn into endless attrition games where the cost of involvement far outweighs the strategic yield.
That constant tension is why understanding global security isn't just for military analysts anymore. It impacts global markets, supply chains, and international stability. And honestly, whether you're analyzing high-stakes geopolitics or tracking the subtle shifts in pop culture, having a sharp, multi-dimensional perspective is essential. That is what we strive for every week on the New Sentinel. We dive deep beneath the surface of complex global events, offering expert analysis and compelling storytelling so you can actually understand the world shaping around you. If you're enjoying this deep dive, Make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share the show. And for entrepreneurs listening who want to align their brand with insightful, forward thinking content, the new Sentinel offers direct platform opportunities to feature your products and services to an engaged global audience.
Speaking of global reach, one of the most fascinating aspects of modern conflict is how much attention gets focused on a few major headlines, while equally volatile kinetic zones operate entirely in the shadows.
Absolutely. Think about the border assaults along the Central African Republic and Sudan, the ongoing separatist clashes in Papua, or the volatile kinetic rhetoric constantly simmering along the line of control between India and Pakistan. Why do these lesser covered conflict zones matter so much in the broader strategic landscape?
Because they serve as testing grounds for the exact same game theoretic dynamics, often with even fewer international guardrails, take the Kar Sudan border zone. You have a fluid mix of rebel factions, mercenary groups, state militaries, and foreign private security actors competing over vital natural resources and porous borders. The incentive structure there heavily favours illicit arms flows and localized warlordism over state building. When Sudan experiences internal collapse, the spillover instantly destabilizes neighboring regions, creating a chain reaction of human displacement and security voids.
And in Papua, you have a classic counterinsurgency dilemma played out in dense, terrain hostile environments. The local separatist fighters leverage their knowledge of the topography to wage low intensity kinetic warfare against government forces. The government responds with security operations that risk alienating local populations, which in turn feeds the insurgency's recruitment pipeline. It becomes a self reinforcing feedback loop.
Then you look at South Asia, specifically the nuclear armed context of India and Pakistan surrounding Kashmir. There, the game theory shifts from insurgency management to high stakes deterrence theory. The kinetic rhetoric and localized border skirmishes aren't just posturing, they are deliberate signals designed to test the adversary's red lines without triggering a strategic nuclear response. It's what game theorists call Salah misslicing, taking tiny incremental operational steps that are individually too small to justify a massive retaliation, but collectively alter the status quo on the ground over time.
When you pull back and look at all these pieces together, from urban combat tactics and proxy networks to forgotten border clashes, a disturbing pattern emerges. The systemic incentive structure of the international system seems almost engineered to perpetuate friction rather than resolve it. Peace often requires both sides to make simultaneous concessions, but without absolute trust, the fear of betrayal forces both sides to keep fighting.
That is the fundamental prisoner's dilemma at the heart of modern conflict. If both parties disarm and negotiate, they reach an optimal collective outcome. But if one party disarms and the other takes advantage, the disarming party suffers total defeat. Therefore, defecting continuing kinetic operations, funding proxies, maintaining aggressive rhetoric becomes a rational choice for each individual actor, even though it leads to a catastrophic collective outcome for humanity.
So, how do we break out of that trap? Is peace simply a structural impossibility in a multipolar, proxy driven world?
It requires fundamentally altering the payoff matrix. As long as key actors calculate that the benefits of proxy warfare and kinetic leverage outweigh the costs of international isolation or economic strain, the cycles will persist. Real structural change only happens when third-party mechanisms or diplomatic architectures raise the cost of conflict higher than the price of compromise. But until that structural shift occurs, the game remains active on every front.
It leaves us with a sobering thought. War is rarely just an outburst of passion. It is a calculated mechanism driven by incentives, fear, and strategic math. As we watch these invisible and visible front lines evolve across the globe, the real question isn't just who is winning the current round, but whether humanity can ever redesign the game itself before the cost of playing becomes unbearable. Thank you for listening to the New Sentinel. Keep asking the hard questions, stay informed, and we will see you next time.